let me tell you a story about a zombie game. Not the one where you chainsaw your way through hordes of undead. No, this is the story of the other one. The one that's been in early access longer than some YouTubers have been alive. I'm talking about Project Zomboid. A game that crawled out of the indie graveyard covered in bugs, burglary trauma, and broken promises, and somehow refused to die. It's lived through piracy, betrayal, a literal robbery, and one of the longest running NPC jokes in gaming history. And despite all odds, it didn't just survive, it became a cult classic. Not because it was finished, oh no, but because it kept going. This is the forgotten story of Project Zomboid's development hell. Our story begins in early 2011. 4 indie developers in the UK and 1 in Canada, calling themselves the Indie Stone, set out to create the ultimate open-ended zombie survival sandbox. Inspired by Minecraft's model and by classic zombie films, they released a paid pre-alpha tech demo of Project Zomboid on May 28, 2011. The idea was radical at the time. Develop the game live with the community's support, adding features as they go. What could possibly go wrong? Within weeks, disaster number 1 hit. In June 2011, before the team could even finish celebrating their first sales, Project Zomboid's original build leaked onto 4chan. Even worse, the leaked version had a tweak, an update now button that let anyone download the latest game files from Indie Stone servers without paying. In other words, piracy wasn't just costing potential sales, it was actively racking up the devs' bandwidth bills. The devs scrambled. They had a choice: shut down everything or adapt. They took the nuclear option for the time, temporarily taking the game offline for paying customers, and instead rushed out a free public demo the very next day. It was a risky move, but it likely saved them from going broke on server costs. As the Indie Stone explained, the problem wasn't people pirating per se, it was that this auto-updating pirated copy could bankrupt them by hammering their servers. They even posted an apologetic blog titled, "Sorry we've had to take the game down for the day," explaining how an exploit was draining their funds and begging legit players for patience. As if one financial gut punch wasn't enough, PayPal decided to do what PayPal does best: freeze accounts. The Indie Stone's PayPal account, where all of those early pre-order funds lived, was suddenly locked in May 2011. Apparently, their flurry of pre-order activity tripped some automated "this might be fraud" alarm. The Indie Stone suddenly couldn't access a chunk of their own money for 6 months, while PayPal gave murky reasons, leaving the devs desperate. The Project Zomboid devs had to come up with a clever workaround to get the game to the customers. The solution was moving sales to a platform called Desura, a sort of Steam alternative for alpha games, and giving out the game keys there. It worked, but the message was clear. In this industry, even your payment processor can suddenly become an endgame boss fight. Fast forward to October 15, 2011. By now, the devs had pushed out a few updates, built a small dedicated fan base, and were grinding away on the next big update. Then the unthinkable happened. 2 of the developers' apartment was broken into and robbed. The thieves didn't steal a TV or a stereo, they stole their laptops, which contained most of Project Zomboid's source code, and the latest development work that hadn't been backed up off-site. It was a catastrophic setback. Months of code simply vanished into the night. The most recent backup they had was effectively an older version of the game. Everything new was gone. The immediate reaction from lead developer, Lemmy, was raw and heartbreaking. He went on Twitter and bluntly announced, "We're fucked basically. We still have code, but it's basically before the last update. This will probably finish us. Sorry to let everyone down." That tweet, full of despair, was later deleted, but not before it was screenshotted and spread around. It's hard to imagine a darker moment, an indie dev literally saying, "This might be the end" in public. The community was stunned. Many rallied with support, but others responded with anger and panic. The official Indie Stone statement a day later struck a more defiant tone, vowing that Project Zomboid will come back stronger. But the damage was done. They'd lost huge progress and had to essentially rewrite major parts of the game from scratch. This incident became legend in indie game development circles, a cautionary tale about backups. In fact, the devs later gave a talk at a game conference titled "How Not to Make a Video Game," openly detailing all these early screw-ups. By the end of 2011, Project Zomboid had seen more tragedy and drama than many games see in their entire lifetimes. Lesser projects would have quietly died right there, but like a bitten survivor with unfinished business, Zomboid shambled on. After the burglary, the Indie Stone could have given up. Instead, they hunkered down. 2012 was all about recovery. The team rewrote the code, re-added features, and essentially tried to climb back to where they'd been before fate sucker punched them. Regular updates on their developer blog kept players in the loop about progress and setbacks. The game's tagline was, "This is how you died," and in a meta way, the devs were experiencing all the ways a game's development could die, yet stubbornly refusing to stay down. And by the end of 2012, Project Zomboid was back on its feet. The game once again had the features it was meant to have, and the indie stone was looking towards the future. If this story was a movie, 2013 is that hopeful montage where things finally start going right. After a year of hard work, Project Zomboid was ready to face the world again. The big goal was Steam. Back then, Steam didn't just accept any early access title. Project Zomboid had to go through Steam Greenlight, meaning they needed enough community votes to convince Valve their game was worth selling. But thanks to the notoriety of their previous disasters and the genuine promise of the game's concept, they got greenlit. On November 8, 2013, Project Zomboid finally launched on Steam Early Access. The devs marked the occasion with a heartfelt blog post titled, "It's Been a Long Road," where they announced, "Yes folks, it's official. Project Zomboid will finally take a place in the early access section of Steam." They talked about being excited and terrified to put their baby in front of a larger audience. For the indie stone, this was a triumphant high. They'd survived the 2011 gauntlet and now had a second chance at success. The game was still very rough, an isometric zombie sandbox with basic graphics, no multiplayer, and yes, still no NPCs. But it had heart and depth, and a growing cult following who saw its potential. Steam Early Access would provide a more stable income, and a bigger testing pool. The plan was to iterate quickly, add all those missing features, and march toward a finished game within a couple years. Launch on Steam went decently, no new catastrophes, aside from one small issue. The game was buggy, and had performance issues on many PCs. It wasn't perfect, but it was playable. Early access players had at least a taste of the apocalypse. By the end of 2013, Project Zomboid had transformed from that unlucky game that might be doomed, to the little early access game that could. The foundation was set for future updates, and all the major crises were over. Right? If 2011 to 2013 were explosive in terms of events, the next several years were a slow burn. This is the part of the saga where time stretched on. The indie stone, now a battle-hardened crew, tackled development methodically, but often slowly. New features came, but often after long waits. In 2014 to 2015, they introduced things like hunting, trapping, and more survival systems. The map expanded, they added farming, cooking, medical systems, all the nitty-gritty that made Zomboid a deep simulation of surviving the apocalypse. In 2016 to 2018, vehicles were introduced, and when they finally arrived, it was a big deal. Now you could mow down zombies or make a quick, noisy escape, but implementing vehicles was tough in their game engine, contributing to the slow pace. Next, we had the graphics and animation overhaul, which was perhaps the most infamous delay. Originally, Zomboid's characters were sprite-based and pretty stiff. The devs wanted a more modern 3D model system to allow smoother animations. This overhaul took literal years. They teased it as early as 2015, but it kept getting pushed. It finally materialized as Build 41, first released as the beta in late 2019. The most fundamental and wide-ranging update that Project Zomboid has ever had. It was a payoff for all those years of groundwork. Characters could now climb fences, sneak around, get dragged down by zombies, and use improved combat. It felt like the next-gen version of the game. The wait had been agonizingly long, but the result impressed even skeptics. Players who had dismissed the game started to take a second look. Crucially, Build 41 also reintroduced multiplayer, after it had been absent for a while. The game did have multiplayer in early builds around 2014, but it was so unstable that the devs removed it to rework it properly. So for years, Project Zomboid was single player only, fueling even more "where are the NPCs, I'm lonely" complaints. But with Build 41's improvements, they finally flipped the switch back on for co-op and dedicated servers. And this time it worked. Suddenly, you and your friends could try surviving together. This combination, polished gameplay and multiplayer, acted like gasoline on a smoldering campfire. Project Zomboid caught fire in popularity. Late 2021 and early 2022 saw a massive surge of players. The numbers tell the tale. Project Zomboid was, for a moment, one of Steam's most played games. Not bad for an indie game that once had to beg people not to pirate it. It was a true unexpected success. After years of being an underdog, the indie stone was now watching their creation trend. The developers were ecstatic and a bit stunned. Fans who always believed were vindicated, and new players were discovering what made Zomboid unique: its attention to detail, its unforgiving yet compelling gameplay loop, and the endless stories that emerged from it. So by 2022, Project Zomboid was in a better place than ever. A solid base game, a vibrant community, sales pouring in, and a positive buzz in gaming media about its overnight success. Momentum on their side, the Indie Stone forged ahead. The next target, Build 42, a massive update focusing on expanding the late game with crafting and introducing animals. If Build 41 was animation overhaul, Build 42 was crafting and world overhaul. The idea was to give players more to do once they survived the initial mayhem, sustain communities, even run farms with sheep and chickens. The devs outlined their vision for 42 in blog posts: more advanced crafting stations, brewing alcohol, making pottery, forging metal, even breeding animals like cows and pigs. Essentially, they want long-term survival to be a richer experience, laying groundwork for NPCs when they eventually join the fray, and potentially form factions or settlements. They explicitly noted that this would also help multiplayer servers stay interesting in the long run. But of course, in classic fashion, Build 42 itself took a while. As the community enjoyed Build 41's multiplayer goodness, they also grew antsy for the next big thing. By mid-2023, some started to grumble about the wait for 42. After the high of the recent boom, folks didn't want to see development slow down too much, but the Indie Stone kept up their steady dev diary updates, showing screenshots of new features, like pigs roaming farms, new underground areas, and complex crafting UIs. By December 17, 2024, Build 42 entered open beta for public testing. It wasn't fully stable yet, but anyone could opt in to try the new toys. Finally, in early 2025, Build 42 began reaching players, marking another significant milestone in this marathon journey. So here we are in 2025. Project Zomboid is technically still in early access, on Build 42 Plus, with Build 43 on the horizon. It's been over 13 years since the first alpha release in 2011. Think about that, a child born when Project Zomboid first came out is now a teenager possibly playing Project Zomboid. That's insane in video game development terms. It's not just a game, it's an institution in the indie scene, representing the idea to never give up. Retelling the development history of Project Zomboid feels like recounting a war story, over a decade of struggle, from leaked code on shady forums, to PayPal lockdowns, to an actual burglary that stole the guts of the game, from public relations nightmares and community showdowns, to the slow crawl of improvements and the breakthrough of sudden success. It's a saga of resilience that blurs the lines between tragedy and comedy. How else do you process the fact that the zombie game's biggest enemies were internet pirates and apartment thieves? You have to laugh, shake your head, and maybe pour one out for all the obstacles that didn't manage to kill Project Zomboid. The Indie Stone made every mistake in the book, and even wrote a book about it figuratively, but they also demonstrated incredible dedication. Many indie projects would have folded under far less pressure. The fact that PZ is not only still around in 2025, but thriving, with tens of thousands of players and a vibrant modding community is downright inspiring. As for now, the wait for NPCs continues, but if this story has proven anything, it's that eventually the devs do deliver on their promises, just on a timeline that often tests the limits of sanity and patience. And maybe there's a poetic angle to it. In a game about surviving as long as you can in a doomed world, the developers themselves had to survive long-term against all odds in a cutthroat world of game development. One day when Build 43, or 44, or 45 finally introduces those much-anticipated NPCs, we'll have another chapter to this story. Perhaps Bob and Kate will reunite, NPC factions will roam Kentucky, and Project Zomboid will inch closer to that mythical version 1.0. Until then, the game remains in early access, but not in our hearts. In our hearts, Project Zomboid has proven itself. It's a game that refused to die, that came back stronger after every catastrophe, and that slowly, but surely won over an army of players, one update at a time. This is how you don't make a video game. And this is how Project Zomboid lived. In the end, it didn't just survive, it prevailed. So next time you fire up Project Zomboid and inevitably get eaten by a horde, take a moment during the death screen to appreciate the journey behind that game over. It's been a long, bizarre, darkly funny road to Build 42, and the ride's not over yet, so grab your shotgun, nails, and wood planks, cause it might be a long one.